Hi, everyone. We are going to talk about agility versus change of direction ability today. And I'm pretty excited about this discussion because what we're basically doing is bringing in a little bit of everything, sort of like a pyramid. And I feel like we've really been building towards this discussion for so much of the whole program. We need to know a little bit of anatomy. We need to know a little bit about the nervous system. We need to know about speed. Uh, we just need to know about so many things to better understand what's going on when the body is encountering agility or performing change of direction. And this is basically where the athletes are going to separate themselves. So, you can take so many people and you can train them to go out there and sprint to the best of their ability or to run fast. But now we're starting to get into a little bit more of what's going to actually be going on a sport court, and what can we do to actually really impact the quality of play and movement. So that's arguably one of the bigger things that we can do to impact and help our athletes. Speed and agility and change of direction ability. So if we refer to page 522 of the NSCA Essentials, speed is the skills and abilities needed to achieve high movement velocities. Change of direction is the skill and abilities needed to explosively change movement direction, velocities, or modes. Agility, the skills and abilities needed to change direction, velocity, or mode in response to a stimulus. So note there that the big differentiator is in response to a stimulus. So there's a big difference in what athletes can go out and run predetermined routes and what athletes can go out and respond to what's actually going on in a live environment and make the proper decisions and movement patterns there. I want to bring up Newton's 3 laws of motion again, because when we're talking about change of direction, a lot of what we're going to be fighting is inertia if we're running in one direction, and we need to decelerate. Our inertia is going to want us to keep going in one direction. And as we decelerate, we're going to re-accelerate in the correct direction, or in the new correct direction. And with all of that going on, there's going to be a lot of forces being exerted, whether it's our foot into the ground, or our body weight acting on our joints, or whether we might be running into other individuals. And so keep in mind that there's a lot of actions and reactions. So this is where injuries occur. So, knees are going to start to have more problems, ankles are going to start to have more problems, because you're going to take maybe big, strong, healthy athletes running at high velocities, and then they're going to have unexpected decelerations and reaccelerations. And so those are great times to tweak or injure connective tissue, or with all that reacceleration and dynamic activity. If the athlete is not used to it and has not been exposed to some of that movement patterns lately, that's going to be a time to basically spike their risk for soft tissue injuries. So in my mind, I really think about a hamstring issue. So if an athlete has not been training athletically lately, and they go out and try to perform their sport, they're going to have an increased chance of a soft tissue injury. And remember, we don't want to be all speed and no brakes. So going off of our last discussion on speed is extremely important. But if we're only able to move quickly, but unable to respond to our environment, or unable to change directions as needed, you might, if you're a track athlete, that may not be a problem. But other than that, you could be getting yourself into trouble. So make sure that your training is well-rounded and is appropriate. Go back way early in our program when we talked about a needs analysis. Many athletes need to be able to decelerate and reaccelerate in a timely fashion. Agility. Agility is the combination of both change of direction, speed, and one's ability to perceptually interpret a situation and make decisions. Agility is encompassing requiring visual scanning, anticipation, pattern recognition, and knowledge of situations. Change of direction is more dependent on technique, linear speed, physical properties, and anthropometric variables. You must first be effective in your ability to change direction before applying it in agility training. So yes, if I had an athletic group and I had time to train them, I would start with a focus on change of direction ability, and then I would grow it into agility. So I would introduce stimuli at a later date. But first, I would encourage you, and I would admit that it's my bias, that I would focus on a non-stimulating environment where my athletes know what's required of them, and they know how we want it performed and executed. And that would be our change of direction training. And then later on, I would challenge them with new stimuli. And you've got quite a few cone drills and assessments that you can use. T drill, L drill, 5-10-5, 5-0-5, 300-yard shuttle, beep tests. That beep test we talked about in our work capacity and conditioning discussion. So the T drill and the L drill. So on this L drill, we're going to start in position 1. And the way it's often done is that an athlete might have to run out and touch their right hand to a line here, and then run back and touch their right hand again to a line here, and then revisit that path out, sprinting, 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 and then through that starting position to finish. And this is going to show their ability to get low, to get in awkward postures, to accelerate, to be dynamic, to be basically quick. A lot of quick feet. We're only talking about 5-yard increments. So that's not really, if you've got great top speed, you may struggle in this 5-yard increment because you're basically spending the whole time crouching down, taking a few powerful steps, and then crouching down again. So it's going to address some of the ability to basically just be mobile, to decelerate, and to reaccelerate. So it's going to be very good, not so much for agility, but for change of direction ability, which great change of direction ability is probably a pretty good precursor for agility. But again, with no dynamic stimulus, this is a change of direction ability drill, not an agility drill. And the T drill, the common way to perform it is to start here, sprint forward, still facing forward, shuffle to the right, touch the line with your hand, turn, sprint 10 yards, touch the line with your hand, and face forward again, shuffle, and then back pedal. That's one way to perform it. You can mix it up and do all sorts of variations. Now, that's a change of direction drill, but this can be a good drill to utilize by maybe placing a coach on the other side of this cone. And as the athlete runs forward, that coach might bark right or left. And so that athlete has to make a last-second split decision about going one way or the other way. And so I want us to think about this drill with the coach providing a stimulus. I want us to think about that in some of our later discussion that will be coming up on soon. And a few more drills here would be the 5-10-5. So the 5-10-5 athlete starts sort of straddling the line here. And typically they'll put one hand down, such as the right hand. And if the right hand is down, then that means they're going to go left. And what they'll do is they'll take a couple of unconventional steps, sort of what I would call a strafe. I've also heard this run called a glide, where their chest is facing forward, but their hips are about 45 degrees turned underneath them. And they're going to run over in that direction. So if they started facing forward, facing away from us, that maybe this is the right hand that's down, and then they run left to start. They would then touch their left hand to the cone here, and then they would turn and sprint forward for 10 yards, touch their right hand here on this line, and then turn again for a 180 to sprint through the finish line. That's your 5-10-5. And keep in mind that this is used for tests. You know, it's a little bit more popular in the football world because it's one of the more popular drills used in the NFL Combine. And we've talked about that in the past, how sometimes drills are just more popular for maybe not the best reasons. But I would say that this is a pretty great drill as far as looking at a simple test that will show people's change of direction ability. And we will revisit this image and this as we're talking a little bit later about some mechanics. And the 505, going 15 in to 5 back and done. And I like this because it's giving us a bigger buildup as opposed to maybe our L drill that we were just doing where everything was in 5-yard increments. And you know, you're never really seeing any speed and you're sort of up, down the whole time. I like this one a little bit better because it's going to give us a chance to accelerate and actually see some speed. But at the same time, it's going to challenge that deceleration at a higher acceleration, at a higher velocity, excuse me. So again, a different test is just going to give you a slightly different view of the athlete's abilities. Our 300-yard shuttle and the beep test. Now, we already talked about our beep test, but I will remind you that is a little bit more, it's a possibly more appropriate test for some field sports and for sports that include a lot of starting and stopping, like court sports, field sports. You know, even I would say even wrestling could benefit from that, as opposed to maybe like a 5-mile run or a 1-mile run. You know, in sport there's ebbs and flows of energy output, and so that beep test or yo-yo intermittent test, you know, these are opportunities. So these are opportunities to basically show an athlete's ability to put out power and work, and then repeat that effort. So repeated sprintability with minimal and controlled rest. And again, we've talked about the beep test before, the yo-yo intermittent test. I'm not sure if we mentioned it in our previous discussion on conditioning and work capacity, but this would be another opportunity that would show very similar skills and abilities. Now the 300-yard shuttle, 10 yards out and back, 20 yards out and back, 30 yards out and back, 40 yards out and back, 50 yards out and back. So you just need a 50-yard space, but overall you'll end up running 300 yards, and a lot of athletes will get it in around a minute or less. So the closer to 50 seconds you are, the more competitive you are on that. But yeah, it's just showing as opposed to a track, a 1-minute challenge on a track. This is going to include some more deceleration and reacceleration. Okay, so how do we bridge the gap between our change of direction ability? So maybe we spent a whole lot of time working on cones and maybe markers or speed ladders. I'll come back and talk about speed ladders in just a second here before I forget. How do we go from all that where everything's controlled and then get our athletes to apply these skills and these movement patterns in more dynamic environments where agility is actually being implemented? Well, basically, I'm going to set a groundwork and a foundation of change of direction ability. So introducing different skills and drills, and then I'm going to make them more complex by introducing a stimulus of some sort. So, all's well and good when we are in the gym and we are in a controlled setting and we know where we're going and we're practicing skills. Maybe we're working on getting low and lowering the hips. Maybe we're working on a big wide base. Maybe we're working on maintaining a tall chest. But what about when push comes to shove and we're on the basketball court and we need to change direction? So how can we get from all that good stuff that's happening in a controlled setting to trying to avoid falling on our face on the basketball court? And I would say that it's complex. It's going to include breakdown of your weaknesses. You got to find how to get stronger, where you're stiff, where you're immobile. But you also need to practice this skill of response. And if this player had maintained a wider base of stability, they perhaps would not have fallen. And maybe you can argue that they just slipped. Maybe there's some sweat on the floor. But one player was able to maintain and control that change of direction and that agility, and one was not. So some examples would be change of direction drill, maybe a sprint into a lunge stop, and then building off of that, you may sprint to a split stop. You may sprint to a split stop. You may also follow that with a shadow drill. So on a shadow drill, you have maybe a cone here, cone over here. You're on a line out on the field maybe, and you've got athlete 1 here, athlete 2 here. And whichever way athlete 1 goes, maybe they shuffle this way or they shuffle that way, or they do a cartwheel that way, or they turn and backpedal this way, or they sprint forward. Whatever they do, the other athlete should be mirroring them and reacting and performing those same movements. And you can, just like we program our strength training, you can program this as well based on the distance, effort levels. And with effort levels, sometimes going slower is a better way to build your fundamentals and your foundations. Your effort, so your speed, distance, session length, attention spans are going to wear thin, muscles are going to fatigue, things like that. So just kind of knowing that this can be trained very similar to the muscles getting trained. And when we're doing this, the muscles will get fatigued, joints will encounter some stress, and the nervous system will encounter some stress. And I would say it would be my bias and my advice that quality should trump quantity. Is that you're going to, a little bit like my bias from our speed discussion, and how Coach Tony Holler is sort of able to put into words and preach his theories that sort of match up with my philosophy, is that quality is going to be more important than quantity. So bringing back our T drill here. And again, remember, we might throw a coach over here. We might throw a coach over here who's going to give us a cue. And we might be sprinting forward and they say right, and we go right. Or we might be sprinting forward and they say left, and we go left. So those are examples of consistent inputs or consistent coaching. What about inconsistent coaching? So maybe we've done a few reps of being told what to do, a few reps of being pointed in a certain direction. Well, what's going to happen when the coach says, go where I say, not where I point, and you run forward and they point right, but they say left, and then you get caught up, and then you hesitate, and you maybe take an awkward step or two. So now that's going to be a little bit more like sports, because sometimes a ball takes an awkward bounce, or sometimes you can't see a ball. Sometimes you don't know where it's going, and you have to go from traveling in a high speed or high velocity into breaking it down to a low athletic position and being prepared to go one way or another. And with joint or disjoint cues in coaching, you can maybe get follow the same cues during one point and get a different type of cue at a different point. So maybe let's clear up my sketchboard here. So maybe that coach that's over here, maybe they tell you that they're going to give you a cue. They're going to give you a point here. And then when we get to the next cone, they're going to give you a verbal cue. So maybe it's left, forward, or back. So if they tell you left, you're going to continue on the drill like normal. If it's forward, maybe you sprint out. Or if it's back, maybe they have you backpedal. So you might receive a visual cue here, and then an audio cue on the backside. And then you can go even further. You can start changing up your visuals. So you might do hand signals. You might have little flags. You might do like slight kicks of the foot. With audio, you might have verbal. You might have a certain whistle blow that you have. Speaking with one coach who works with tactical athletes or military athletes, he was using different drops of coins on the ground. So he said the quarter and the dimes were making different sounds, and so he would have his athletes react to that. Maybe not necessarily on a T drill, but on other drills that he wanted them to boost their agility, their ability to respond to stimuli. And we'll come back here. I want to talk about our speed ladders before I forget. I should have given a speed ladder its own slide. All right, here's the deal. Here's my spiel on this speed ladder. Speed ladder is a tool, so it's not a waste of time. But the typical speed ladder that we see these days is kind of like a gimmick a little bit. So I would say it's good for warming up. It's good for a little bit of fun. It's good for a little bit of ankle stability. It's good for priming the nervous system and getting the feet moving. I would not say that it's good for making athletes faster. To call it a speed ladder is very arguable. I think we can use it for a lot of good things. There's lots of fun little challenging drills. For the feet, you can jump through it and do like a little bit of hopscotch. You can get down on your ground and weave your hands through it. Lots of good things and good uses for it. But I do not think that it makes us faster in like conventional speed, and that's a problem because it's mislabeled, and I've had a lot of athletes spend a lot of time on it and not really make improvements. And the speed ladder we see today, the most common speed ladder we see now, is actually a sort of like a second generation version of an older ladder called older speed ladder that actually was designed to help us run faster. And so these days, a typical speed ladder is, perfect little squares. Obviously my drawing here is crummy, but what it was in the past, the speed ladder started with smaller squares, and then it built up because as our velocity increases, our stride length increases. And so the older or the original speed ladders, they were designed to encourage longer strides. They were designed to encourage us to accelerate with choppy, strong, powerful strides, and then to extend our length as we were jumping from one step to the next. So that's what a speed ladder used to be. It's not a speed ladder anymore. It's a agility grid, I guess is what you'd call it now. So not a waste of time, but I would just say that it's not going to make us run faster in a straight line. So if I've got wide receivers who are spending, several hours a week on a speed ladder, no, I would say just calm down on that. Use it for warming up. Maybe use it for some rehab protocols if there's been an injury, but it's not there to make you run faster in a straight line. Okay, so for some of our agility work, which again will translate into some of our change of direction ability work, which will translate into our agility work. One of my favorite cues is to build a roof, especially on these drills that we're doing here. And the reason it's, build a roof is let's look at just that simple angle there. So as we start over here, and again, let's say we're straddling that line and our right hand's down, so we're going to go left. And remember that first 5 yards, we're going to do a strafe or a glide where our chest pretty much stays forward, but our hips underneath are going to be running about 45 degrees. And that's because there's not so much space that we're really interested in standing up and turning. So if you remember our Walking Tall slides from our speed discussion, Walking Tall, great movie with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in it, but not a great technique for agility and for speed. That robs you of your ability to accelerate. So with our strafing or gliding motion for those first 5 yards, we're not going to stand up very much. We're going to kind of stay low so that we can touch that next line. And then as we turn 90 degrees and begin sprinting, arguably 180 degrees, as we begin sprinting, we're going to take several hard steps. We're going to stand up a little bit taller, and then we're going to start to decelerate and sink and lower our hips again to touch that next line. And then we pop a 180, and we finish the job there through our finish line. So if you look at that bigger 10-yard work that's going on there, you're sort of building a roof. You're down on the end over here, you're high in the middle, you're down on the end over there. So I just like that cue, and I think that it's, if you're ever going to be doing agility or change of direction work, there's a good chance that might come into play. Now, when we talk about getting down and low and being able to touch the line, or if you're looking at that L drill where on that third cone, you're actually just going to go run out and run around it, you want the ability to produce force and be strong and be fast in some kind of awkward positions. And what's going to help us get in those awkward positions and be comfortable there? Well, that's going to kind of fall back to mobility. So remember, flexibility is basically your joints ability to articulate, but mobility is your joints ability to work under load. So you take maybe an individual who's had like a knee surgery. Well, at the end of the surgery, the doctors might articulate the joint, and say that they have full range of motion. And then later on, when that individual is waking up from surgery and some of the swelling is going on and some of the stress is going on, well, they may not be able to bend that knee as much as the doctors were able to. And that's very common. So their flexibility is fine, but their mobility is not okay. And I want to remind everybody of Mike Boyle's joint by joint approach, in which he brings up the idea, and it's pretty well accepted and makes a lot of sense, that certain joints are going to need to be mobilized, such as the ankle. Ankle is a biggie when we're squatting in the weight room, and I've got a lot of new athletes. Ankle immobility, maybe it's from calf tightness, but ankle immobility is a super common issue. So mobilizing the ankles, the hips, the T-spine, the shoulders, the neck. Now, which ones are actually going to have a big impact on our ability to do change of direction ability and agility? Probably the spine, hips, and ankles are going to be big. Now, what's going to help us stay stable and safe as we're practicing and performing this change of direction ability or agility work? Well, I would place knee stability pretty high up on my list of things to do, because these stresses and this torsion and this torque that's going on in the knee, that's when we have PCL, ACL, meniscus issues. So non-contact soft tissue injuries. So a little bit of knee stability ahead of time goes a long way. So I would remind you all that to get low in those athletic positions, not only in general, but at a high velocity or quickly, I would fall back to this as one of my sort of cornerstones as to how I'm going to get athletes into athletic positions. It tends to be that stiff, that immobile, and unstable athletes don't do so well. So I'm now coaching gymnastics. We've got a gymnastics team at the university, and I'm getting my first go around with them. And I went to do some mobility testing on them. And in my mind, I was just thinking that they would sort of just destroy every mobility test. And with a team of 20 gals, they're basically in the middle on everything. They're not hypermobile, which is kind of what I was expecting. But that's because they're not unstable. They're right in the middle because they need to get into awkward positions and perform just really wild positions with their bodies, contorting and things like that at high rates. But they have to be strong enough to actually do that and to be explosive. This is basically, it's almost like a strength sport combined with a performing art. So, in my mind, I was just naturally assuming that they were all going to come in and be hypermobile and just, kind of be a no-brainer on the testing. But while testing them, they basically fell just right in the middle. They were all just super average with the mobility testing. But it's because hypermobility, they would just go out and get hurt. If they're unstable, they would just go out and get hurt. So again, remember, you've got to get low and you've got to lean. You're almost falling forward. And while we've talked about with speed, we've talked about how we want to plant that foot right underneath our hip. With acceleration, it may go out just a little bit further, but just in those first handful of steps, first 10 yards or so. And what we're going to do there is we're going to take big, ugly, long, slow steps, because that's where we are performing a drive motion. So we're doing a lot of triple extension, and it's also where we're pushing, but we're also producing a little bit more strength there. So later on in our sprint is when we've got a quick cycling rate and we're moving quickly, and we've got low ground contact time. But earlier on, that strength applies. So remember, I've talked a couple of times about watching basically like 230, 240 pound muscle heads go out and out sprint 170 pound speed demons in the 10 to 20 yard range, because those muscle heads have that strength and that power to lean forward and to throw big uppercuts and take big ugly steps and just power through. Whereas those lighter guys, now if you slap another 20 yards or 30 yards on that sprint, the lighter guys will win. But in that first acceleration block, there is something to be said for strength and total body strength, upper body strength, and that driving phase. So having your ability to squat, having good mechanics, and being willing to lean forward, as opposed to wanting to stand up and perform your sprint while you're standing up. So stay low and lean, and have some strength associated with your acceleration. So with speed, in our speed video, I think we found that a soccer field is 110 yards long and 70 yards wide. I think those were our numbers for the NCAA. I put those in the notes on the speed video. So think about that. We've got all that square footage or square yardage or whatever you want to call it. But the average sprint in soccer is about 12 yards long. So we spend a lot of time accelerating. Almost our entire game will be spent accelerating if every run was 12 yards or less. So keep in mind that our ability to triple extend is big. It's extremely relative to our ability to accelerate. And it's going to carry over into our acceleration very heavily. So I bring that up because I want you all thinking about two things. Really, I want you thinking about being hunched down in that first position there, that basically 3-point stance there. Now, very applicable to sports that are outside of track and arguably wrestling. But look at, instead of triple extension, there's triple flexion going on there. So that flexion is in preparation for extension, right? And as we talked earlier about the importance of staying low and producing, your ability to produce strength in the beginning of accelerations and runs, I wanted to bring up our force velocity curve again. Because as we are moving slow in the beginning of a sprint, in the beginning of an acceleration, that's when we actually have time to express strength. Everyone's moving so slow in the beginning that strength has an opportunity to present itself a little bit more. And then as we progress through the sprint, our cycling rate from one step or stride to the next is going to speed up. And so it's going to follow a similar path as the rate of force development, or the force velocity curve, excuse me. So the training we do in the weight room may carry over into what's going on in a sprint and acceleration into a top speed run. But it's also going to be an expression of what's going on just within the run. You're gonna be producing, more strength in the beginning, and then as you've got your momentum built up, and you're starting to stand up, and you're changing what muscles you're using, and your cycling rate is going faster, and your velocity is increasing. You'll be moving more along the lines of speed, strength, and then maximum velocity. I just want to remind you all that stress is cumulative. We've seen this slide before, but I want to bring it back in. Dr. Brian Mann performed research showing that student athletes' risk of injury rises during midterms and finals. So I bring in the camel hump here because that's basically what happens for injuries during midterms and then again during finals. Because stress is cumulative. Not only are athletes staying up later at night to study maybe, or getting up earlier or something like that, but actually just the hormones that are going on within the body make injuries more conducive, and also the detrimental effect on the central nervous system just means that we're not going to go out and perform like we normally do. So researchers found players were more than 3 times as likely to have an injury restriction during periods of high academic stress, such as during finals or midterms, than they were during periods of low academic stress. Among those who played regularly, academic stress was just as important as physical stress when it came to injury restrictions. Stress is a syndrome. Stress is a syndrome, and all stress affects the body the same way, although not to the same intensity, Mann said. So it doesn't matter if stress is coming from practice, strength training, from conditioning, from academics, from relationships, from money issues, from any of these means, it's going to affect the body in the same way, and we've only got so much resistance that we can give before something starts to break. So I'm sure you all remember this and have this slide memorized from our stress management discussion, but I wanted to bring it back because this acceleration and sprinting and decelerating is one of the more stressful things we can do to the body. The nervous system is going to be challenged. The joints are going to be challenged. The muscles are challenged. So, I don't worry too much about injuries on a conditioning day or on a weight room day. I'm always worried about injuries, but when I see athletes going out and doing athletic things and pushing and trying to get better and maybe doing them in a fatigue state, that's when I start to cringe a little bit, and I start thinking, when's that next hamstring tweak going to come? Who's gonna end up rolling an ankle? Whose knee's going to pop here, get tweaked? This is when I start, this agility and change of direction abilities stuff, that's when I start to get really nervous. Now, it's kind of 2 sides of the coin, because at the same time, it's the most important thing that we can do to help so many athletes. But on the other side of the coin, it's the most dangerous thing we do. It's arguably the most dangerous thing we do. It's not very controlled. It's dynamic. It's, all the force that's coming through. It just gives a great opportunity for stress to build up and for something to give. So I wanted to bring this up. I'm sure you all have it memorized and, would never forget that stress is cumulative. But I just want to bring this up and encourage you all that you don't have to, have competitions or run races on day one. You don't have to do big, long sprints for sports that never really encounter longer sprints. And it's okay to take baby steps. It's okay to do change of direction work on smaller distances, and then to build up maybe to longer distances, or to start bringing in actual agility and introducing new stimuli that will help athletes become basically better athletes. They'll basically become better at interpreting stimuli and producing a reaction, producing an action. So I just want to bring this up as sort of my closing point, is that we have an opportunity to help athletes here, but a little bit goes a long way. And honestly, if our athletes are 18 years old, you got to think that for the last 16 or 17 years, they've been moving possibly in one way. And that if you're going to start changing the way that they move, there may be consequences. Is that to our eye, they may need to get a little bit lower, or they may need to work on their hip mobility. But if they're performing well, and they've been doing that for the last 16 years, we have to keep in mind that maybe one tweak followed by 50 full go reps is not appropriate. So, use a little bit of the science and a little bit of the art, and just make sure your athletes are your number one priority, and not necessarily your game plan. Try to keep your athletes more important than your game plan. And that's all we've got. Thank you.